Welcome you once again. In this video, we are looking at hypothesis. So we seem to have jumped right from research questions on a qualitative side and then to hypothesis. And one may assume that we don't have anything like a research question in quantitative research. This is not the case. We have research questions everywhere because by the time you find a research problem, it means a question must be raised which must be answered. But to just to make this clear that this particular area is focusing on the quantitative side, whereas the previous video is looking at the qualitative side, we are looking at hypothesis. So what is a hypothesis? That's the first thing. The word hypothesis comes from two words, hypo and thesis. So hypo and thesis, the word hypo has two meanings, but the first meaning is kind of proposing a tentative statement, an assumption, saying there's something tentative, a tentative subject that needs to be verified. That's what it says. You're proposing something that needs to be verified. So the thesis part is a solution to a problem. Yeah, it's a solution to a problem. So for example, if I say, studying in rural areas leads to poor performance for online learners. So in other words, I am proposing a solution that because of online learning, the rural learners are performing badly. I'm basically already proposing a kind of a solution, almost like saying either improve online learning or remove it all altogether so that rural learners can have a better education. That is what it means. You're kind of proposing a solution to a current problem. So the point of this being a tentative is that it means it needs to be tested. Yeah, it implies the need for a tentative statement implies the need for testing and need for verification, empirical verification. Empirical basically means scientific verification. The second meaning of hypo usually means the composition of two or more variables. So already by the statement I've given of online learning, rural learners, and poor performance. Online learning, rural learning, those are already variables, and I'm seeking to find out or to establish if that relationship causes poor performance from those variables. So the hypo part already insinuates composition of two or more variables. Now this is quite different already from the qualitative style of learning or the qualitative research questions which was going out to explore. You're seeking, you're discovering, you have no assumptions whatsoever. Hypotheses can also be described in terms of their nature. One, we have concepts. Yeah, we have concepts already by the example I've given you. There are already concepts, ideas being presented. Rural learners, online learning. There are two concepts that are being brought together. Then poor performance, leading to poor performance. Those are concepts that we are already bringing forward. Then it's also a verbal statement or declaration. A verbal statement which is being declared. So it's not one of the things we must make clear. It's not just a mental idea, but it is just as the statement I've given you. These are ideas and concepts that I'm bringing out that need empirical verification. The other thing that we must see in a relationship is a tentative relationship. Already the statements are given. There's a tentative relationship. Second, or rather fourth, we are also looking, we are forward looking. It's future oriented, something that needs to be verified. Key point is that it is a pivot for scientific research. Later on, we shall look at things like how a hypothesis makes research more focused. It's a pivot. It's the central part of the research. And one of the nice things about hypothesis, in comparison to qualitative research and just looking at research questions, it's very, very specific. So it really guides a researcher on what it is you're looking for, a specific relationship, and you don't go outside of that. The function of a hypothesis is that it's offering a temporary solution which needs to be investigated. It's offering a temporary solution. We are also offering it's offering a basis from which you are given a chance to discover if there are other possible solutions to the problem. In that sense, the hypothesis may turn out to be false or true and may lead to formulation of another hypothesis which can be studied by somebody else. So each hypothesis is presenting to an investigator a definite term which has to be objectively tested. It has to be objectively tested. Secondly, the fact that it delimits the field of investigation, that this is where later on we talk about being focused. The primary purpose of the hypothesis is really to keep the scientist within a specific lane and not to go outside of that lane. So the importance of the hypothesis, most of these we have basically hinted on them. It keeps the investigator's eye on what needs to be investigated, therefore leading it to be focused in nature. It is also extremely clear and specific in goals. A hypothesis almost stops you from going off board, going off the charts. Now, of course, this may sound oh, that maybe I better go for quantitative research to make my life a little bit easier. Even formulating that hypothesis, we shall see a little bit later on, there are challenges to it, especially if you're not well grounded on what theory it is that is guiding you to develop that hypothesis. We don't develop them out of the blue. There must be a basis for you to come up with these ideas, these concepts, which then create your conceptual framework. There must be some theoretical framework that guides you. So it links together certain variables and seeks to find a relationship. Of course, all these others to prevent blind research all goes back to, and guiding light all goes back to keeping you focused on your hypothesis. So we have different forms of hypothesis. Now, at the beginning, I said when we talk about hypothesis, we may automatically assume that a quantitative research does not have a research question. This is not the case. You can have the hypothesis in a question form, then also in a declarative statement. Case in point, we had among the sample articles I gave you an article on multitasking. That was a typical quantitative research. If you take note, that research was being guided by two research questions. The first was, to what extent does IT-related multitasking influence hedonic experience? To what extent? You said that's measuring. We're trying to measure. To what extent does IT-related multitasking influence hedonic? So we have IT-related multitasking. Yeah. For example, I'm here teaching you. What if I was teaching you and at the same time I am focusing on the phone, there's an ongoing video? There would be that video is creating a hedonic experience. I am teaching you, then I multitask doing something else. It's creating some. So to what extent does that hedonic experience affect me as a user as I multitask doing something else? Will I teach as effectively as I would if I didn't have this video playing on my phone on the side? Would I teach a little bit better? So that is a question that is being asked. Does this effect vary according to individual traits such as personality? Does this effect, does it vary? Again, measuring, there's a measurement. Does it vary? Maybe my personality is, I am, let's say, disciplined by nature. I am maybe task oriented, and then you may be somebody else who is all over the place. Will this effect vary according to individual traits such as personality? Again, you see, all of these, you remember the questions when we're talking about qualitative research and quantitative research, we said qualitative research don't assume any relationship. This one is, all these two are already assuming a relationship. This is assuming a causal relationship. This is assuming an effect. Very good examples from research articles. Then from these two hypotheses, from these two research questions, two hypotheses were developed and were tested. Developed and tested. You can go and read that article again just to see typically what this type of research is. So if you look at this first hypothesis, that a multisensory hedonic activity generates more positive emotional valence compared to a unisensory activity. Yeah, that's a question that begs to be verified. A multisensory hedonic activity generates more positive emotional valence compared to a unisensory activity. Positive emotional valence. Valence refers to the level at which I don't know how to explain it, but if let's say there are several people who are multitasking, there are several of us multitasking, and they measure the level of emotion, positive emotion. That means pleasure that we experience. And if you ask me, and then if you ask me, I say, oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at 6. If I'm multitasking, ask a second person, I'm at a 7. Another person puts at a 6. Things like that. The valence is between 5, 6, 7, 8. Then when you come to a unisensory one, you find the emotional valence is at, you may get a 5, but maybe you may get a 4, a 3. The emotional valence is less. The positive emotional valence is much less compared to the multisensory activity. So this hypothesis begs to be verified. And you see, when a researcher now goes into that experience, now if you examine that article, what they specifically did, and when they were carrying out the experiments, was all to determine if this hypothesis is true. The second one says a multisensory hedonic activity generates lower emotional arousal compared to a unisensory activity. So again, it's the same thing. It's the very same thing, that a hypothesis that begs to be verified. The same thing goes for, now you notice these first two are related to the first research question. So by answering these two hypotheses, they will have answered that first research question. Now, when it comes to the second research question, these two hypotheses help answer the second research question. Now, you see the big difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. Whereas the quantitative research, you may have a research question and sub-research questions, or a research question which is supported with an objective, then specific objectives, and help answer. Now, in this case, the hypothesis helps to answer the research question. I hope now that we can differentiate clearly between the two. Then we come to uh, again to other forms of research. We have directional research, and we shall see the remaining. So in this one, a directional hypothesis, it denotes a relationship, that there's a directional relationship is that there is between variables. There's a certain direction. We can have a discussion. We are going to put up on the discussion forum on those hypotheses that we've seen. How would you describe them as directional hypotheses? What is the expected direction between the variables? Yeah, and what is the anticipated reaction of it? Then we have the non-directional, which are sometimes stated as null. Yeah, these ones are normally measured in a statistical format. They are tested using a statistical framework, a framework of probability. That's a non-directional hypothesis. We're going to see some of those null hypotheses. Now, we had earlier said that as much as we see hypotheses are easy, it's quite possible to poorly formulate a hypothesis. If you are going quantitative, I'd advise, if you're not experienced with quantitative research and hypothesis, seek the help of experts in that area. They can help you formulate something that is researchable. So it can be poorly worded. That's one of the ways. It can be poorly worded and can prevent you from generating enough data. And if we fail to generate enough data, we fail to make conclusions and make generalizations. And that's one of the key things about quantitative research. We need to make some kind of generalization. Not saying that with qualitative research we can't generalize. We can by leaving a question mark, allowing for somebody else to add on, and we discover more and more, and therefore making it possible for others to make it quantitative in nature. But we can also make generalizations in qualitative research. But in quantitative research, it is more pronounced because you're dealing with large populations, basically. What can cause difficulty in formulation of hypothesis? First is the lack of a clear theoretical framework. Now, someone may say, but Sheba, one time you said that theoretical framework and conceptual framework. Bear in mind, whether a theoretical framework is important, whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative research, extremely important. The theoretical framework in qualitative research helps to guide you on what it is you're going to look for, because you don't know what you're looking for. Or it's going to guide you on the variables that you need to look for, which then affect, or which then point you to others, which you didn't know before. It helps you to discover. Now, the theoretical framework on the quantitative side, on the other hand, is the one that gives you already the causal relationships. Take an example. I have given the example of the term theory, technology adoption model. It makes assumptions on what is it that can cause adoption of any ICT device, usefulness and ease of use, and even then goes further to relate it to gender. You can read this theory even further, more than what I'm giving, the examples I'm giving you. Now, imagine if someone was going to do a survey on Moodle for the whole of Uganda in terms of gender and adoption. They would need to formulate that using term. They would need a theoretical framework using term, and maybe if there's another theory which is looking at adoption and open source, they use those two. That would be the theoretical framework that guides those are some those hypotheses that one formulates. If you go back to any research article that I've given you, they always point out theories that they have used. Theories that they have used. That is a theoretical framework. You should have a clear theoretical framework that helps you develop those hypotheses, those assumptions, because they have already tested quite a few of them, although now you're testing them in a new context or some area which is not yet clear or is not needs some more verification. There's also having a theoretical framework but failing to use it logically. Yeah, failing to use it logically. Now, here again, be guided by your supervisor. That is one. Two, go back also to experts, people who are experts in a certain area. Look at other research that have used those particular theories that you have selected. How did they use them? Then that can guide you on how you can use it for your particular research. Then you may not be clearly acquainted with this type of research, that is quantitative research. All research, there are people, every researcher normally has a particular leaning. Like I said, I think I've stated before, I lean more towards qualitative research because that's where I started from. But that does not mean I will never do quantitative research. I have attempted it, I've tried something, but I'm not a huge expert there. So the usual experience plays a part. However, do not despair if you lack experience. There are experts there to help you. Your supervisors are there to help you. And even if your supervisor may not be conversant, they may know another lecturer within the university who is an expert. So do not despair. Testing of hypothesis. Now, previously we talked about a null hypothesis. What exactly is a null hypothesis? It is one which is basically stating that there is actually no significant difference in comparison between two variables. So here we say, if we are comparing method A and method B, and then we say all of them are good, or all of them are equally good. If a hypothesis is stating that both methods are equally good, that is a null hypothesis. Now, one may say, what's the point of doing it? Well, the point is determining if it is really true. Is it really true that both are are, um, are equally good? Is it really true? Now, that same researcher will may pose that as the first hypothesis. Then the second hypothesis poses an alternative hypothesis where they say method A is inferior to method B, or method B is inferior or something like that. So that is the alternative hypothesis. Now, normally the null hypothesis is this here. There's a covering is normally symbolized with an HO. Yeah. So already we want to know the hypotheses that we've looked at. Are they that we for samples? Are they null hypothesis or are they directional hypothesis? That's a question we can go further to and even have a discussion on. The alternative hypothesis is denoted with an HA symbol. So here is an example of how this would be symbolized in quantitative research. We can have further discussions what these other symbols are. I wouldn't want us to get confused with too much discussion here. Now, how then would we test? How then would we test? We'd test on the level of significance. So when the researcher is carrying out the statistical analysis, because testing normally comes down to statistical analysis, especially for when it comes to these issues of null and alternative hypothesis. The researcher would say, I'm going to maybe put my percentage at 5%. If I find out the level of significance is less than 5%, then I will say my null hypothesis is true. If I find it to be above, then that means if it is less than, that means my null hypothesis is true. If it is above, then I reject my HO analysis. That is, the two methods cannot be of the same quality. One is superior to the other. So that's the significance of putting the level of significance in the research. Now, normally they put it at 5%, but there are situations when this may be underscored, and it may give you an error. They may be, it may actually, they may, you may, let's say for example, if you are interviewing X number of people about the superiority of method A and method B, and you find that your level of significance is actually lower. The level of significance is actually, and then you say, oh, it is true. But yet in actual sense, it is not true. One method is actually superior. Now, that may affect your results. So in all these things, again, the advice of an expert is extremely important on setting your level of significance. What is the maximum level that I can put it to ensure? So it takes consultation, it takes reviewing of literature for you to be able to know where can I put my significance. So I want to thank you for listening to me. We shall have even more detailed discussions and examples in the live classes, but this introduces us to the topic and allows us to begin reading on these topics. Thank you so much for listening to me.